Imagine two people walking into the same coffee shop on a Monday morning. One of them is a billionaire worth over $100 billion. The other is a 30-year-old professional named David earning a respectable salary of $80,000 a year. The billionaire orders a regular coffee. No fancy add-ons, no luxury breakfast, just coffee. David, standing in line behind him, orders a caramel latte, a breakfast sandwich, and a smoothie. The total bill is $18. Now here's the strange part. The billionaire leaves the shop having spent less money than David, the person earning a tiny fraction of his wealth. This might sound strange, but it reveals something uncomfortable about how money actually works. The biggest financial leak in most people's lives isn't a luxury car, a giant mansion, or a designer wardrobe. It's something much quieter. A spending habit so normal that you barely notice it, yet over the course of your life it can quietly destroy hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential wealth. Let's call it the invisible spending habit, the habit of small, automatic consumption that quietly shapes David's financial life. Most people think wealth disappears through big financial mistakes like buying the wrong house, starting a bad business, or making a terrible investment. David used to think the same thing. But in reality, wealth usually disappears through something far less dramatic, tiny decisions repeated thousands of times. A coffee here, a subscription there, food delivery because David is tired after work, an upgrade because it wasn't that expensive. Each purchase feels harmless to David, but money doesn't operate on feelings. It operates on math, and math is ruthless. To understand how this works, imagine David's money as an army. Every dollar David earns is a soldier. He can send that soldier to two places. The first is the battlefield of consumption, where the soldier disappears forever. The second is the battlefield of investment, where the soldier doesn't die but recruits more soldiers. That's compound interest, and compound interest is how wealth is actually built. This is something Warren Buffett understood decades ago. Buffett bought his house in Omaha in the 1950s for around $31,000 and still lives there today. Meanwhile, people like David often upgrade homes every time their income increases. Bigger house, better neighborhood, higher mortgage. They assume wealth means upgrading everything. But Buffett understood something different. Every dollar not spent is a dollar that can multiply. Jeff Bezos followed a similar philosophy in the early days of Amazon. For years after becoming a billionaire, Bezos drove a modest Honda Accord. Not because he couldn't afford something better, but because he understood the difference between status spending and strategic spending. One drains wealth. The other builds it. David, like many people, never realized how powerful that difference is. But here's where psychology enters the picture, because humans are not rational creatures when it comes to money. David isn't just making financial decisions. He is reacting to social pressure. And social pressure is expensive. A study from the University of Chicago found that people significantly increase their spending when they live near wealthier neighbors. Their needs didn't change, but their reference point did. Suddenly the normal car doesn't feel normal anymore. The normal apartment doesn't feel impressive. The normal vacation doesn't feel exciting. Social comparison quietly rewires David's spending behavior. Social media has amplified this effect dramatically. Instead of comparing himself to a few neighbors, David compares himself to millions of curated lifestyles online. People in exotic locations, luxury apartments, designer clothes, and seemingly perfect lives. But what David is actually seeing isn't wealth. He's seeing consumption, and those two things are often very different. In fact, they are often opposites. Real wealth is usually quiet, while the loud displays of wealth David sees online are often financed with debt. Cars with monthly payments, vacations on credit cards, designer items bought through financing. From the outside it looks like success, but from the inside it often looks like financial pressure. This is how the invisible spending habit works in David's life. It rarely shows up as one huge purchase. Instead it shows up as lifestyle drift. David's income increases, so his spending quietly increases with it. A slightly nicer apartment, more restaurant meals, more convenience purchases, more subscriptions. Each upgrade feels reasonable to David, but something dangerous happens. The gap between what David earns and what he keeps never grows. And that gap is where wealth is actually built. Let's look at the math. Imagine David earns $70,000 a year and receives a $10,000 raise. Instead of investing the raise, David upgrades his lifestyle with a better car payment, more dining out, and a few extra subscriptions. That extra $10,000 disappears every year. Over 10 years David ends up spending $100,000. But here's the brutal part. If David invested that $10,000 per year with an average return of 8%, after 30 years it could grow to nearly $1.2 million. The raise didn't just cost David $10,000. It cost him a future millionaire moment. This is why many billionaires appear surprisingly simple in their lifestyles. Mark Zuckerberg famously wears nearly identical gray t-shirts every day. Steve Jobs wore the same black turtleneck for years. To people like David this seems strange, but it reflects a deeper philosophy. Every decision consumes mental energy, and the more complexity David adds to his life, the more attention it demands. Luxury doesn't just cost David money, it costs him focus. A larger house requires maintenance. More possessions require management. More financial commitments require stable income. Over time David's lifestyle becomes a machine that must constantly be fed. Suddenly David isn't working for freedom anymore. He's working to maintain his lifestyle. Meanwhile people who control their spending habits create a very different dynamic. They build a large gap between income and expenses. That gap becomes savings. Savings become investments. Investments eventually become freedom. The real power of money isn't consumption. It's optionality, the ability for David to say no to a job he hates, no to a toxic boss, and no to financial stress. But that power only comes from owning assets. So how can David break the invisible spending habit? The answer isn't extreme frugality. It's awareness. The first step is defining what economists sometimes call an enough lifestyle. The level of comfort that genuinely satisfies David's needs. A comfortable home, reliable transportation, and experiences David truly enjoys. Once David identifies that level, the goal becomes simple. Keep that lifestyle stable even as income grows. Instead of upgrading his life, David upgrades his investments. The second strategy is automation. Every time David's income increases, he automatically directs the extra money into investments. If the money never reaches David's spending account, he won't feel tempted to spend it. Another powerful habit for David is calculating the future cost of purchases. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" David asks a different question. What would this money become if I invested it? A $2,000 gadget might feel affordable today, but if David invested it for 30 years it could grow into more than $20,000. Seeing purchases through the lens of future value completely changes how David thinks about spending. Finally David audits his ego spending. Some purchases genuinely improve David's life. Others exist purely to impress other people. A simple test reveals the difference. If no one else could see this purchase, would David still buy it? If the answer is no, the purchase is probably about signaling rather than value. This brings us back to the coffee shop. The billionaire who bought the simple coffee understood something David didn't yet understand. Wealth isn't about spending power. It's about control. Control over time, choices, and the future. David might look successful today with his comfortable salary and lifestyle, but if he spends everything he earns he is building a fragile financial life. The billionaire buying a simple coffee isn't trying to look rich. He doesn't need to, because real wealth doesn't shout. It grows quietly through compounding in the background. The difference between those two lives often comes down to a habit so small that David never noticed it before. The invisible habit of spending first instead of investing first. The moment David changes that habit, the trajectory of his financial life changes with it. Wealth is rarely built through one brilliant decision. It is built through thousands of small ones. And the most powerful decision David can make is simple. Before his money goes out into the world to buy things, he sends it out to build his future first.